So welcome to this Sabbath School Conversations Cafe, Sabbath School. Today we're talking about giving back. I am your facilitator today. I'm Dr. Alicia Shelley, and we have a new facilitator, Phaedra. Welcome. So we're going to be facilitating today's lesson. Before we get started, though, let us just bow our heads for a quick word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing us to this day, this Sabbath day of rest. I ask, Lord, wherever we are zooming in with, I ask that you just continue to bless everybody on this call. Protect us, Lord, protect our families. Most importantly, Lord, we ask that you send down your Holy Spirit to touch our minds so that we can be able to learn from this lesson, learn from ourselves, learn from the discussion that is generated, Lord, and that we can apply it, and most importantly, meet and become the person you want us to be and to meet you in the kingdom. I ask, Lord, you just continue to watch over and keep us, and in your name we pray, amen, amen. All righty, so I would be remiss if I did not ask you to share some praise reports. How has God been good to you this past week, or maybe it was a week ago? How has God been good to you this week? Would anybody like to start off with a praise report? Anybody? I just want to, and then while we're here, I just want to say thank God, because there's a group of us that went to India for a mission trip and they got there safely. They were able to go to church. So we praise God for their safe travels. And I also want to just thank God for just getting through the week. I had a COVID scare, and turns out I did not have COVID. No one else in the group got COVID. So it's a blessing, because we were all packed in that car. And so we were just ripe and ready to get COVID, but the Lord protected us despite that. So I praise God for all of that. Any other praise reports that we have? Anybody else that just wants us to say, just unmute for a second and just say how good God has been to you this week. All right. Dr. C. Ray says, I'm praising God for my nephew's birthday today. He's a teenager and I feel old. Yes, that is. It's so funny how children grow. Like, I have godkids, and I'm like, I remember when you were a baby, and now you're a teenager. What is going on? Anyone else have any prayer requests they'd like to share with us? Anything? Just thanking God how good you've been. Anybody else? One more praise report. Sorry. All right. Well, okay. Oh, go ahead, Drew.
Yes, how you doing? Happy Sabbath to everyone. I honestly just want to thank God, for being such an amazing, tactical God, where we, could not fathom all of the plays that he has put into place in advance for us. We just stumble on our blessings sometimes. And so I just want to praise God for his thoughtfulness toward me and us.
Thank you, Drew. That is very profound. Like, it is amazing. I was just talking this morning. I was like, how good God is despite ourselves. Like, he just kind of opens up. He goes through and just opens up the pathway for us, even when we don't know it and maybe not even deserve it. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. I just want to say in the chat, Keisha Smith says, praising God for bringing her husband through a minor surgery. He's healing now and resting. So thankful. Well, thank God for him that he's made it through his surgery, and we'll be praying that he continues to recover. So, all righty, let's get started with our softball question today. My first question for you is, what would you do if you inherited $100,000? What would you do if you inherited $100,000? So feel free to raise your hand so we can call on you. But what would I do with $100,000? So I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be a little bit practical. I'm going to pay a bill. I'm going to set some aside for taxes because they are coming for me. And then 3, I would buy me a car. That would be what I spend it on, what I splurge on. I'd buy me, and not just any car. I would buy me a Lexus RX, RZ, 450, whatever those numbers are. It's basically an electric SUV. That's what I buy with that $100,000. And then I would save. I didn't mention I would give it to church. These are all just negotiable. But this is what that's what I would do with $100,000. What would you do with $100,000? I know you would do something. You wouldn't just let that money sit. What would you do with $100,000? Phaedra, what would you do with $100,000?
Definitely same. Take care of any outstanding debts, put some in savings. But I'm traveling. The kids and I are going to get some stamps in that passport, and we are going to see the world.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Traveling. That's the one thing I realized that with COVID, I was like, I need to travel. I need to travel. So, all righty. Let's see. What else would you guys do with $100,000? Charmaine, what would you do, or Robbie, what would you all do with $100,000? So Diara says she'd pay off her college debt, buy her mom a house with $100,000. Okay. Anyone else? What would you do with $100,000? You guys can't be quiet today. I will call on you. Come on. All right. Thank you, Robbie. Go ahead.
All right. So definitely pay off debt, pay my tithe, and I'd probably get some new seat covers for the Jeep.
Ooh, new seat covers for the Jeep. Okay. Would this be leather, or would this be like velvet, cashmere, anything like that?
Leather, the best that Walmart has to offer.
The best that Walmart has to offer. All right. I love it. I love it. Still being frugal there with Walmart. All right. So no Gucci, no Versace, what's it called? Balenciaga, nothing like that. We're going with just the regular seat covers. Okay. All right. Past Elder Hubbard, what would you do with $100,000?
Well, I like what Rob and everybody else is saying. I would just return my tithe and offering first, so the God can continue to open the windows and give me some more money. Then I would just address the high interest credit card, because most credit cards going to hit 18 to 25%. So we're going to hit the credit cards and pay them off. And then I'm going to join my other colleague. I would go traveling. I would do some other things. But yeah, kind of in that order.
No, I think that's very frugal. I mean, not frugal. I think that's very good, because I mean, you have to. We can get out of debt, out of this shovel, it seems, of just of debt. I think that's probably best. Especially $100,000, it's gonna go fast. It's gonna go fast. All right, Keisha, what would you do with $100,000?
Okay, so I would definitely pay my tithe and some debt, and then put some away for the children, and then whatever I have left, I'm going shopping.
Now where would you go shopping?
Oh man, I've always wanted Louis bags. I'd probably get a Louis.
Yes. I'm telling you, I'd have my Louis bag. I'd be like, yes, I would go everywhere with this Louis bag. I was like, yes. All right. I love it. So my next question is, would your answer change if you knew that you only had 24 hours to spend that money because you were going to die? Would your answer change? Now, would your answer change, Keisha, if you knew you were about to die in 24 hours after you got this money?
I would probably put it in a will for the children and my husband if I knew I was gonna die. Because when I was reading the Sabbath School lesson, it really hit home for me, because it tells us that we should be responsible and not wait until we're dying then to think about, because I might not be mentally well, and what if I wasn't married, so I would definitely have to make sure that I put it in a trust.
That is so smart. And you're absolutely right. We don't know when our last day is. Many people who drive to work thinking they're going to come home, get in an accident, and pass on. So you're absolutely right. Michi says he'd put it in a trust to avoid the capital gains taxes. So put it in a trust. Anyone else? Robbie, are you still getting those Walmart seat covers with your $100,000, or are we doing something different with it? What would you change if you knew you were going to die in 24 hours after getting that money?
Yeah, because that Jeep is James's legacy, so he'll get the Jeep too. But I'm definitely not paying off that debt. I put that money in a trust, and the people who I owe, they just have to figure it out. I put the money in a trust for the kids. And yeah, we're
Okay,
still
so
getting seat covers.
you're still getting seat covers, but you'll put it in the rest of the trust for the kids. All right, Elder Hubbard, how would your answer change? What would you do differently?
Well, here's what I would do differently.
Mhm.
I wouldn't return a tithe. I would take that. Well, maybe I would, but I would take the $100,000 and buy a $5 million insurance policy, and take the tithe off of that, so the family can be well off when I go.
Okay, all right. So you get a life insurance so your family had something to save on. All right, what would you do, Drew, if you knew you only had 24 hours to live after you received that $100,000?
Wow. So I would say, again, make sure that my children, legacy. So again, trust sounds very thoughtful. But I've also, as far as, going out, seeing people on the street, being able to, give to people who you're seeing at the supermarket. And so I would definitely, 24 hours is not a lot of time. I would be at the grocery store. I would be at places just trying to, give money away, and let's say about half of it. And tithe is a given. So that was not one that I would think to mention, because again, that is just something that we return, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so yeah, just trying to bless people.
I love it. I love the fact that we're trying to bless people, because you're right. 24 hours is not a long time. And, with that money, the question is, how do I want to spend the last day of my life? And I think for me, that last day is to spend time with family. And I think for me, I wouldn't necessarily do with the debt. But I would make sure I already had a trust set up so that it would cover any outstanding debt that I have. Because in a trust, all your assets will go to the trust. So if there are outstanding debt, that can pay off the debt. The trust will. And so I probably would, like you said, give to others, give to my family, set things aside. But I would make sure that we're giving it, because I only got 24 hours, and I can't take it with me. So today, the Sabbath School lesson not only is talking about giving back, but ultimately it's talking about legacy. How do we leave a legacy for our families? How do we live a legacy as well? And so how do we set that up? I'm going to turn it over to Phaedra. I'm going to ask if somebody can read Luke 12:16-19 for us. And then Phaedra, you take it over. Can somebody read Luke 12:16-19? Again, Luke 12:16-19, and we have that in the chat. All right.
I'll read it.
Thank you, Charmaine.
Okay. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry.
All right. So thank you, Charmaine, for reading that. This group sounds like they have a pretty good handle on, being wise stewards of finances. What was this guy's financial plan? What was his financial plan? And what do you think about his financial plan?
Well, it seems like he was saving. He was saving a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was definitely some saving.
Mm-hmm.
What else was he doing? What was his plan for his increase? For his goods?
I think the plan for his increase was just for himself. He was good. He was going to live life, and he wasn't going to worry about anything or anybody. He was just living it up, like we see a lot of the famous stars do. And it doesn't end well, though.
It doesn't end well. Okay. Okay. So I hear that he was going to save. What else? What else do we see that he had planned? Save, use it for himself. There's one other thing. In financial literacy, we talk about the 4 different things that we do with our money. What are those 4 categories?
Angela, we can't hear you.
I said invest. I don't know if that's the correct answer.
Invest is one. You get your money, maybe you invest it. What are the other 3 things we can do with our money? There's investing. We mentioned one already, saving. You can save your money. You can invest your money. What are the other 2 things that we do with our money?
C-Ray says in the chat, save, spend, and give.
Right, right. So when we talk about what we do with our finances, they're going to fall into one of those 4 categories. We're spending our money, we're saving our money, we're investing our money, or we're donating to charity. We're giving in however our heart feels to give. So keeping those 4 categories in mind, what was this gentleman's financial plan? What did it include? So we said saving. What was the other thing that he was doing with his increase, with his money?
He was spending because he's about to build a new barn.
Right. Spending also, when you see the eat, drink, and be merry, you got to put out some money for that. If in our modern terms, you got to go to the store and get that. So in this gentleman's financial plan, it included just 2 things, saving and spending. So what do you guys think about that plan? Is anything missing? He's all good? Is this a balanced, healthy financial plan?
Charmaine has her
Charmaine?
hand up.
In this instance, no, because in everything we have to acknowledge God, and wealth is actually a gift from God, and that wealth is to help those who are in need. So he had a responsibility beyond himself, but to face that responsibility and to act on that responsibility, you have to then turn to God to show you how to do what he has called you to do, be it whatever gifts it is. Wealth is actually a gift. And then his responsibility was to go back to God and say, okay, how do I use this gift that you have bestowed upon me, and go on in that way.
Okay. So I'm hearing 2 things. He didn't really acknowledge that it was because of God he was able to get this gift. And he didn't seek God's wisdom on how to do the other thing, which is be charitable with it. All right. Let's read, if somebody will read verses 20 and 21 as we continue to look at this passage.
I'll read it. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you.
But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whomever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God."
Thank you. Thank you. So this changes the story a little bit. It's one thing to have stuff. It's another thing to say, oh, I'm about to die and have to answer to God. What sticks out in these 2 verses? What popped out at you as you read these 2 verses or listened to these 2 verses? Charmaine?
I think it has to be, as I was looking at it, it's a level of forgetfulness. Like he completely forgot about God. It was just him and the world. And it's just a level of selfishness that equates to spiritual death.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Anything stick out at you, pop out at you? Dr. Ray?
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind is that we can have our plans, but whatever God has planned, it can derail our plans at any moment in time. So we might think that we're going to do X, and God says, "Mm, psych,
Right.
it's gonna be Y." And also, tomorrow's not promised to any of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Angela.
Yeah, I was going to say what Dr. Ray said, that, tomorrow's not promised, and to assume that you are going to just kick back and live the rest of your life out without proper planning, as God said, it was foolish.
So what was he God calls him a fool, a straight fool. That's funny. God name calling. He says your life will be demanded of you. And then what does he say right after that? Your life is going to be demanded. And then what does he ask the guy?
Who will get what you have prepared for yourself?
Yeah.
Where will this go?
Where is this going to go? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. So I have a few things. What is the difference between saving and hoarding? Okay, so I'll stop with that. What's the difference between saving and hoarding? Is there a difference?
So I think of hoarding. So saving I think it's fine to save where you're trying to save to have for retirement so that you can live on, save, or if you're trying to buy a house, buy a car. It's hoarding when you're like, I have money all over my house. Like instead of putting it in a bank so it gets interest, I'm like stuffing it under the sofa, stuffing it under the mattress. I don't want, like, I'm afraid somebody's gonna get my money. So I'm storing it and hoarding it and not utilizing it for something else. I think also when we save, yes, we're saving for something specific, but also the fact that we're not giving it towards someone else. So I think that's how I think of hoarding and saving.
Okay. Hiding it in the mattress, hiding it in the cupboard, in the empty cracker box. All right, that's how you see hoarding. I see some hands. 3.
Angela was next.
Yeah, so I think Alicia touched on it. I think hoarding is fear-based. I think it comes from a place of fear of being afraid that you won't have, or that somebody's going to come take it. Whereas savings, I think, is more of just preparing for a future. Whereas hoarding is just out of fear.
Okay.
Robbie and then Charmaine.
Oh, okay.
So I look at hoarding as having things for the sake of having things. You ever watch those shows where they hoard one or two pictures of Elvis is not really that big a deal. But when you have 7,000 pictures of Elvis because you think you might need them, when people won't throw things away because they're afraid they may need them, like Angela said, it's kind of fear-based. And it's just real selfish. Like there's no use for this. I have no intent on what I'm going to do with this. It's just more stuff to have. Where saving, there's intent on what you're going to do with it.
Okay. So intention, one has purpose, and the other one is just kind of stuff. Charmaine, then Drew.
In terms of the parable and this man, he had enough and overflowing where had he relinquished some, he would still have enough. And they're billionaires right now. And according to the calculation, it will take about 1,000 years to spend all of their money. So the difference is with saving is, okay, you have to put up for rainy days, for emergencies, and so forth. Hoarding is you have reached that point. Like you can give and it will not affect you or affect your savings. You have an overflow of wealth.
Okay. Okay. So pop quiz before we go to Drew. If correct me if I'm wrong, but it's recommended that in your savings account you should have how much money? What's kind of the standard for a good amount to have in savings? Who knows?
I would say what, 3 to 6 months of expenses.
Right. Right. So just a little practical tip. If you're working towards saving, work towards having between 3 to 6 months. That's after taking care of your debts, because those high interest rates are going to kill you. But work on, and this is not financial advice, this is just stuff, people tell you. We're not financial consultants, we're not financial gurus, but I think it's pretty practical to say you should have something set away for emergencies. And from what I've read and understood, 3 to 6 months is a good amount. Drew, go ahead, Drew.
Yes, I like the idea that Charmaine brought out about he had an excess, and if he had given, if he had the heart to give, he would not have needed to build a new bar, tear down and build new, right? So from personal experience, I don't know if anyone else has witnessed this, but I've seen where people who grew up with a lack, who for some reason now feel the need to, if they didn't have a lot of shoes, then they buy shoes, or if they didn't have, whatever it is, that when they have the means, they go out and buy excess. So he was amassing for the sake of amassing, not for any good intent, that would have come out of it, only to get more.
Okay, so that kind of speaks to the hoarding piece, having stuff just to have stuff, having money just to have money, not really with any intention. So let's move on a little bit to, well, what does it mean to be rich toward God? So we know savings, having money set aside for emergencies, for a rainy day is practical. There's a balance between that and having just too much. So what do you do with that excess? What does it mean to be rich toward God? Charmaine.
Rich towards God is dependent on him, is having his character. It's not necessarily the financial aspect. No, I'm not denying that part, because we need that part for the physical reality in which we live. But there's a spiritual aspect of us that Christ requires of us, and that is that sacrifice. How are we rich in God? We do the things that he did in terms of like the needy, the poor, helping and the sick, the widows. He actually gives a blueprint as to how to be rich toward him and how to give. But I think it's just we have to be connected with him through the Holy Spirit to know how to give, because my wealth in him may be very different from your wealth in him, because he's calling us both to the same things but in different ways.
Right. That whole spirit-filled, spirit-led is very important, because like you said, we each have different amounts of increase, and God may lead me to do one thing with my increase, my excess, and he may be leading you to do something else. So we're exploring what it means to be rich towards God. And Charmaine says, having God's mindset about what we do with our money. Anybody else want to chime in on what it means to be rich towards God? All right. So going back to the middle part of the verse where God asked the man, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is after telling him, you're gonna die tonight. Where does your money go when you die? So you have that 100,000, the 24 hours have elapsed, your family and friends are sad, you're gone. Now what happens to your money?
Well, if you have no will, it goes to the state. Well, it goes to probate court for them to decide what happens to your items.
Okay. Okay. Charmaine?
So there is one, this happened years ago, wealthy person. And believe it or not, she left her entire estate to her dog.
I remember that. I remember that.
So, you know, it depends on who you are as a person and what you value in life. It may not go where you think it ought to go. And I don't know what happened to that dog.
The dog, yeah. Dr. Ray says the government's going to get theirs. Be rest assured the government is going to get whatever belongs to them. So we just read Luke 12:16-19. Just to recap, there's a fella, he has the stuff. He's like, oh, I have so much stuff. I need to tear down my storehouse and build bigger ones. And then I'm just going to live it up. Because YOLO, you live once, I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry and live the rest of your life. And then he had to come to God meeting. Well, God came to him and was like, hey, dum-dum, you're dying tonight. Then what's going to happen to your stuff? All of this is not an isolated story. There's actually some context to it that Alicia's going to lead us into. What's the context of this parable?
Yes. Before we get to the context, there was a question that I want to bring up. So, Charmaine, you talked about the billionaire. So, is being a billionaire or even a millionaire a sign of hoarding if you're trying to build your business, build your company, and then be able to still give back? You're still giving back, but is that a sign of hoarding? Because, go ahead, Charmaine.
So some of these billionaires and millionaires, they have enough money to take care of 3 third world countries, like literally make sure they're not impoverished, right? A whole entire country, at least 3 countries, and still have monies left over. So that's an example of hoarding, because you can address the social issues of poverty, but they're choosing not to because poverty is a profit. And so that's why it's in existence, but they have the power to eradicate poverty.
And what if they still are, but they do it in their own way or the way God has led them to do it? Would they still be considered hoarding? Because there's some billionaires who give out, like you see them on TV, they give out Thanksgiving, savings coupon at Kroger and stuff like that. So is it still, go ahead, Karen, what's your thoughts on that?
Hey, good morning. Happy Sabbath. So to answer the question, no, my thoughts are that it's not hoarding. The Bible tells us that we are going to have the poor till God comes. They will be with us forever. However, it is our responsibility to use our resources to help where we can. There are lots of philanthropists in the world, and they do give and they support as much as they can. But even with the giving and the supporting, it won't ever be enough, right? And so if you've been blessed to be able to use your gifts that God has allowed you to have to reach your goals, save your money to do the things you need to do for yourself, your family, and leave a legacy and help those in need, then I think we're being good stewards. I don't think that's considered hoarding. I think the example that we have in the Sabbath School lesson of the rich man who had so much that he had to build even bigger barns instead of giving it away to bless others, now that is an example of hoarding.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. Well, go ahead, Phaedra.
I just want to jump in here and add, and it's not always just the billionaires. Like some of these are publicly traded organizations. You guys can help me with the terminology. They're stakeholders. I listen to there's just people being greedy. I was on a call one time and they were talking about the rising price of electricity and power. And the stakeholders decided they wanted to increase the rate because they wanted a higher percent earnings. They were already profiting, but they wanted more profit. And so it's not just the billionaires, it's also these stakeholders. There's a thing of just greed at the hands of other people. So, if you're in a position of power, decision making, just be mindful. Like, do we always have to increase, or can we be happy with the increase and invest it so it grows on its own without like putting your foot on other people's necks?
And so C. Ray wrote in the chat, studies show that poor people statistically give more to charity than rich people proportionally. Lots of the billionaires who give to charity give to their own charities that they make. And of course, that is a tax deduction. So definitely we see that. We're going to step back here and read Luke 12:13-15. It says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, who appointed me a judge or an arbitrator between you? Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. So the question to you, what is the outcome when you don't have an estate planning in place when you die? How does that affect? We know that, it's going to go to the court for them to decide, but how does that affect your family? How does that affect your legacy when you don't have an estate plan already outlined? And while you're thinking about it, let me tell you a story. So we all know Aretha Franklin, right? She died in 2018, 5 years ago. But because she had no will that was submitted to the state, her state is still being decided upon 5 years later. It's still in probate court 5 years later. Now she's estimated to be worth over 80 million with all the royalties that are coming through. And they actually found 4 different wills, 3 that were handwritten, pushed under the sofa, and then 1 that was drafted by a lawyer but never signed. In her case, it's affected the relationships between her 4 sons and family because of the stress of this not being decided upon. So how have you seen outcomes happen when people don't have their affairs in order? Go ahead, Karen.
That's a really good example, Alicia. And unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, a friend's family member passed away, and they're now dealing with the same issue. No will in place. They actually was dealing with a tragic disease. They knew they would be passing on and still did not pause to just write down their wishes. So from an earthly perspective, that's exactly the challenge when we don't take care of our responsibilities and write down our will and testament. We end up with legal battles, right? But from a spiritual perspective, if we're stewards of what God has given us, that means that even the funds that are in litigation are also the same funds that are not ours that God told us to use for treasures in heaven. So when we don't document, we're also missing the opportunity to bless some ministry, to bless people who may be in need, a charity, for example, that we know could use those funds to take care of others. So there are really, really large ramifications when we are not fully good stewards of what God has given us. And I keep using the word stewards because I just was reinforced this week by the lesson that it's not ours. So we have to manage well, right? Just like we manage everything else, we have to manage well.
Those are all good points. Because it's not outlined, there's no telling where your money is going and how you could be helping others with that. You're leaving it up to somebody else, and you think they know what you want, but do they actually do it? True story. I had a lady that I knew. Her husband. It was a second marriage. And her husband had told his son that he wanted to leave the house to his current wife because, so that she have a place to live. The son told him outright at that moment, if you do not have it in a will, it's not happening. I guess the father thought that his son would still keep his word, but the man passed away. He had a heart attack and died, and he could not put this in a will. And now the lady, my friend, she's coming up stressed out, losing sleep, because she's like, where am I going to stay? I don't have a home. I'm on a fixed income. The son has already told me to get out the house. So not only does it affect, not only are you missing out giving to others and directing where you want your funds to go, but you're stressing out your family. You're leaving your family in a place where it's division. And this is division that's not going to go away. I've seen people where they haven't spoken to their siblings because of this same fact that they felt their sibling was trying to take money from them. And so if you want to leave your family in a place where they are together, they're on the same page, they're coming and they have a family bond, then you definitely need to have an estate planning. Now, you guys have already shown that you all are very fiscally responsible and have a lot of knowledge on you. So I'm going to ask this question. If you were counseling a relative about this issue, estate planning, what is some practical advice that you would give them about financial planning, estate planning? What are some things that they need to have in place even now? I mean, and my question to you is when should you put that in place? Do you just wait till you get to your 60s, or do you do it now? All righty. Does anybody have any advice for your relative? You all had a lot of good advice. So I know you guys have something underneath there. Somebody needs to hear it. What advice do you all have for this relative? All right. Karen says, everyone over the age of 18 should have a will. This is true. There are many people who die early. I think I was hearing a story, actually there was on 3ABN, of a lady, the teenager died, and the life insurance went to the parent she wasn't close to. Her parents had divorced and went to her father, who she had no relationship with. So yes, you definitely want to make sure you have a will so we know where it's going. What else should they have in place? What else should they do? Mm-hmm. Anything else? Just the will? I know somebody said something about a trust. Anything else you should have in place? And should you talk about your family? Go ahead, Karen. Should you talk to them about the will and everything? Mm-hmm.
So, Alicia, you know, and some of you also know, I teach Financial Peace University, and Angela and I were just teaching this lesson last weekend, because in addition to having your will documented, you also need to consider someone needing access to your things. God forbid you pass on. So that means the passwords to your computers, the password to unlock your phone, the list of all of your accounts, checkings and savings, the name of your manager, who to contact if something happens. All of these are things we don't even think about. But my half-sister's sister passed, and that was a horrible ordeal in trying to get things from her company, because nobody knew who to contact and who to talk to. So again, things that you don't even think about seem simple, but just take 30 minutes and write it all down and put it in your kitchen drawer or someplace where your family knows where to access your documents.
That's so true. In fact, one of the ladies who had passed away, she used to work in my office, well, in our area, but because she had moved and the family didn't have the phone number to her current boss when she passed on, so they had to call our office. So it is important to know who to call their manager. Maureen says, make sure you know the beneficiaries on all accounts. I had one lady who her husband had passed away. They were older. Her husband was more computer savvy and she was more paper savvy. So she's like, it was an ordeal having to get all these statements coming from the bank. I didn't know it was a second marriage. So he had his finances. So I was just trying to figure it all out. And so it can be very stressful trying to not only bury your loved one, but then dealing with their papers. The other thing I want to say that you need to have, and as a physician, it is so important that you have an advance directive. Now, for those who do not know what an advance directive is, it's a healthcare document that states what you would want in the hospital if you were unconscious to be able to answer this. And when we say what you would want, whether you'd want CPR, whether you want a breathing tube down your throat. These are important things, especially if you may be very ill. You may not want CPR, because in CPR, we're breaking ribs. It's uncomfortable. You're under a tube for a short period of time. And so if that's not something you want, you need to make sure that you write that down. And then also the other thing I would say too, who's making your healthcare decisions? If you were married and you're no longer married, you may not want your ex-wife to be making decisions for your health. So you need to outline who will be making that decision. And then I think you bring up a good point. What if you are leaving behind children? Who's taking care of your kids if you were to go? I had a cousin, she wanted me to be the executor of her will. And I told her specifically, I need you to document where you want your children to go, because I don't want to be making the decision on which grandparents getting the kids, because these are my aunts and I don't want them to come after me. So I need you to be very specific. But for those who have children on the call, do you include the minors into knowing what happens if for some reason you aren't there, or if you and their mother are gone, who takes care of the kids? How do you manage that, and how would you manage that, shall we say, for those who have kids on the line? Phaedra, I know you have children. Tell me, how would you manage that?
I'd have to pray about that one, because it's one thing if you're married and have kids, another thing if you're divorced and have kids. And so I have to think about what that would look like, how, legally what I could do and what I can't do. So I would have to get some advice on what I can and can't do with the kids, just because I'm divorced.
That's a good point. And if for some reason you and your husband weren't there, who would be like the next person in like the succession, kind of like the whole royal family? Who goes next if this person were to die? Makes a difference.
The people closest to them. So like my parents are here. I have a sister that's here, but also their dad has an aunt that's here as well. So it'd just be one of those that's available. We would have that conversation and say, listen, if something happens, what order do you feel comfortable in, age wise, availability wise, financial wise, comfort level wise.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's easier for us to say, but it is a very touchy subject, because now you're asking people to care for your kids. And sometimes they may be like, well, I'm old, I can't do that. But it is important to have that conversation, like you said, because you just never know. But my next question is, how would you teach your kids about leaving a legacy? How would you raise them to make leaving a legacy something that's important to you? How do you show them your will, or what would you do? All I have is a dog. So, and I have a succession plan. My mother knows she's getting my dog if I were to pass away tomorrow. So if you have kids, how would you teach them about legacy? Anybody else? I know there's some people here that have kids. Karen says, more is caught and taught. Teach them by showing them. That's a really good lesson. How would you teach them? You would teach them by showing them what you would do. Okay. All right. Teach them by showing them. Anyone else? How have you taught your kids about leaving a legacy, those who've had children or still have children? Do you teach them anything? Or is it just, listen, just go to school, you're good? How would you teach your children about living a legacy? Go ahead, Althea.
Well, good morning, everyone. The best way I think you can try to, I think being a parent and growing up and just in the process of raising kids, you learn that you can try a lot, but it's really what your children chooses to absorb. I think the best thing you can do is live life through an example. And legacy is such a hard thing to, I guess, I don't know, put in the context. because it's like, what type of legacy? Are we talking about a spiritual legacy? A lot of times, you know, we look at the culture today and a lot of parents will be like, well, I want to make sure my kids never experience what I've had to go through. We didn't have this, we didn't have that. And we try to provide our kids with so much, but we're not leaving them the legacy that God wants us to leave them. Just today's verse was talking about being set your things above. Legacy looks different to each person. And now I realize more so the legacy I have to leave with them is not necessarily a financial legacy. Now, granted, a good man leaves their kid an inheritance, but I now know that it goes beyond that. I have to put the spiritual seeds and keep watering it, because I'm learning at this point that Satan is coming to pick that seed up that I every day try to plant. So I think as parents, we need to do a better job as leaving a spiritual legacy to keep enforcing them that above all, God wants you to continue to lift his name, to draw others to Christ with your action, with feeding the homeless, with caring about the needy, the widow, things that talk about true religion. That's cultivating a good legacy that will forever live on until Christ returns.
That is so true, Althea. Like you said, leaving that spiritual legacy. In my Bible study, we were talking about the children of Israel, how like they would have a judge and then the judge would die and then they would go back into sinning again and God would put them in captivity. And it was like this cycle for generations and years. And if the Israelites had, you know, focused on, like you said, that spiritual legacy of importing that to their children and to their offsprings, they may have been able to prevent this whole decline of evilness that actually happened. Robbie, how do you teach your kids about leaving a legacy?
I just want to kind of comment on what Karen typed, that more is caught than taught. You can say and teach and do all that you want to do, but your kids are observing, and they observe your behaviors on a consistent basis, on a daily basis, where you may intentionally teach here and there. And the example I think about is like, son, don't join the Marine Corps, son, don't join the Marine Corps. But at the same time, my dad was his breath, his sweat, his tears, everything was the Marine Corps. So what did I do? I joined the Marine Corps. So what we say is important, don't get me wrong, but what we do, what we live, how we carry ourselves on a day-to-day basis helps us to teach our kids how to leave a legacy. And so in that, the legacy that we want to leave is the legacy that we need to start being.
So be the person that you want to teach, how to teach your kids. So be that person. Okay. So we mentioned this, and Karen mentions this before about giving to charity upon your death. And the Sabbath School calls this deathbed charity. Or maybe we said something else, but that's what I got from it. How can you give to charity, or how can you give to church, or how can you give to God's, to God after you die? Like, I know we're putting it into, okay, go ahead, Karen.
I think you were about to say it, Alicia. It's simple. Just like we're leaving beneficiaries and gifting certain things to our loved ones, you do the same thing with charities. And so in my will, I have a list of charities and percentages of dollars that I would like them to have at my passing. So it's just as simple as that. The hard part is trying to make sure you can figure out how much you want to give, right? You don't want to overextend and lose out on some family members. But yeah, it's just as simple as that. It's literally just listing your wishes and your intent. And if you give to charities now, and if you are supporting and donating like we should as Christians, it's a lot easier to figure that out.
That's true. So giving back now to kind of is good too. So setting that up now. Keon, what are your thoughts?
I was getting ready to let people know that the Seventh-day Adventist Church actually has an actuary department where they will help you design a will. And if you want to, they'll set it so you can leave some money for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And a lot of people don't know that, but that is one of the services that our denomination provides. They promote that a little more with Georgia Cumberland, and we do in South Atlantic, but it is available if you contact the conference office. I also wanted to state that it was funny you mentioned leaving money because they had an issue in Louisville where a lady wasn't even Louisville, but she was a member of the Presbyterian Church, United States of America. And if anybody knows anything about Presbyterians, they have become very liberal in recent years. But they had found that this lady back in the 60s had died and bequeathed the denomination some money that had been in a trust. And the trust had matured, and the church was able to get, I think, like several $1,000,000 that they didn't even know was coming to them. And it just came out of the blue. And I thought it was funny to myself because Presbyterians were very conservative at that time. And I wonder if the lady would want the church to have it now, considering the church now accepts gay marriage and gay priests.
That's a good point. I think they probably would accept any money.
So a woman wanted it to go if she knew what the church would be 50 years after she died.
So I guess the question, I know you can give to charity. Is there other ways to give back to God besides just giving to church? Like, what are some other ways, Keon, that you can maybe give back to God, but not necessarily to church? Because you never know. Like, what if the church changes or, things happen, over the
There's
time?
all kinds of organizations that are quote unquote not affiliated with a religious group. You can leave it to the Goodwill. You could leave it to the Salvation Army, which is a quasi church. They are a denomination. A lot of people don't know that, but they still do the work of helping the needy and the poor. You could leave it to the American Cancer Association. You could leave it to St. Jude's Hospital for children that have cancer. That's another thing a lot of people don't know. People go to the hospital. They do not have any type of money to pay for their surgeries and stuff. And the hospital will look up and see if there's any charitable organizations that exist for whatever you have. And that's how they get their money. You could leave it to Oakwood. You could leave it to a Black HBCU. You could leave it to whoever you want generally. There's no limit in the United States. As long as you are doing it in your sound mind and you write it ironclad that it cannot be contested, you can leave it to who you want. You can leave it to someone wasteful, your pets or whatever, or you can leave all of it to someone you've never seen before, whoever you want.
That's a good point. I do not have any money going to my dog, but yes, we could leave it to our pets. But I think, like you said, most importantly, there are other options, and it's kind of where is God leading you as far as with your where He wants this money to go. And I like what you said and what Karen said, that sometimes you got to start now giving back, making this something that's part of your life as you're living a legacy, like what Althea is saying and what Robbie is saying, that you have to be that person in order to live, you need to live the legacy you want to leave, basically. Now, let's talk about what happens to debt. So I think somebody said, and I can't remember who it was, they're like, I ain't worried about the debt. I'll let y'all figure it out. But let's look back at Aretha Franklin. So when Aretha Franklin died, she left $7.8 million in unpaid taxes from like 2010 to 2017. And of course, this, the IRS ain't playing. All the different, late fees, interest, it rolled up into 7.8 million. Then they actually, before they were able even to do anything like that, or at least figure out who gets the will or the money, they had to figure out how to pay the debt. So how do you manage funeral expenses and debt after somebody dies? Like, I mean, how can you manage that? Should you just go ahead and buy your plot now? Should you wait until you die? Like, how do you manage these? Because it's going to happen, I mean, if we don't live a life of non-debt, so they're going to have to pay it eventually, and it usually will come out of the estate. So any advice, how do you manage the funeral expenses and the extra debt that's occurred after the person dies? Any thoughts?
Alicia, can you rephrase the question? How does who manage?
Well, I guess sorry. Yes. When I say who, when you die, how do you manage your funeral expenses? How do you plan for your funeral expenses and any debt that you're leaving, if you do, when you die?
Okay, great. So debt upon death is pretty much written off. So unless you, for example, have a home and there's a mortgage and you want to make sure that your family keeps that home, then that should be in your will, and then a lot dollars to take care of that, right? But the debt is written off when you pass on, and if you are saving, then you will have savings to cover your expenses, and then hopefully whoever you create as the estate owner or planner should figure all of that out for you using the funds that you've left behind. And it's really a lot easier when you keep things low budget, knowing that in generalization what things cost. Again, it's all about taking a couple of minutes and planning all of that. And if we all have life insurance, your life insurance would cover any additional expenses.
But what about like in the case of Aretha Franklin? Her estate had to pay off her IRS debt before they could do anything.
But that's exactly what happens, right? She had enough money in the estate to pay it off. It's a lot of wasted dollars because it was paid while she was alive, then it wouldn't have had all of that added interest and fees. But the point is she had enough money to cover it. So that's why we have to really, really plan well. Just write it all down. I just keep reiterating that. It's as simple as writing it down. And then depending on the state you live in, you have to make sure that you get that notarized, right? But if you don't have the time yet to make that full will, just write down your wishes in the meantime.
All right, thank you. Keon, did you want to say something? And then it was Linton.
Yeah, I was going along with what Karen said, that basically when you dead, that debt dies unless you have a lot of money. She had a lot of money. If there's nothing to get, there's nothing to get. The way to handle it, the responsible way, is for people to have their own insurance and have everything written up, but people aren't. So that's why you see people doing all these GoFundMe's for funerals, or back in the day, when I was growing up, the fish fry. Everyone remembers the fish fry. But some people would just say, he didn't plan for it. I'm not paying for it. There's too much of an expense. And the cheapest way to deal with that is cremation. And I think a lot of people are going for that now because funerals are very, very expensive. And I remember speaking with a pastor about it, and he told me the one service he hates performing as a minister is a funeral. And I said, why? I was like, because crying and people there. He says, no. Okay. He says, all I see is $20,000 going down into the ground, and the wife and the children are still alive. No one is taking care of how they're going to survive. No one is taking care of how their school is going to be taken care of. And that's money that could have been going for the living. And he told me that he's already told his wife, something happens to me, you can cremate me. If you have to have a funeral, have it the least expensive that you can, because the body is going back to the earth. There's no need to throw all that money into the ground that could have been used to take care of our children and you.
No, keep going, Keon. I was gonna say that's a good point with that. My mom says the same thing, and I'm like, but I want a mahogany casket. I need to be able to grieve in style. But go ahead, Keon, keep going.
And another thing you can do, and a lot of people don't know this, but the cheap thing is to prepay for your funeral. My grandmother did that. My last grandmother, living grandmother, when she died, we didn't have basically too much power to do anything. She had already went to the funeral company that she wanted to do her funeral. She had already paid them. I believe she probably already picked out the casket and everything. And she already had a living will, said that she did not want to be resuscitated. And basically, when she passed away, it was really us just going along with everything that had been pre-arranged, so to speak. And basically just go to that funeral home and say, Mama already paid for this. If it's a reputable one, they should have records of that. They'll pull up, yep, she paid this amount in 1982. And to my understanding, even if the funeral costs more now in 2023, they still have to honor it, to my understanding, as much as they can.
No, that's true. My grandmother, well, one of my mother's mother, she did the same thing. She had everything down to what dress she was wearing, what poem was going to be in the thing. We didn't have any say. We just did what she said. And Karen says we can also prepay our caskets. They actually sell them at Costco and Walmart. So yes, I think that is good. And C. Ray says, yes, you can have car washes to fundraise for your funeral. So, but that's a good point. I think sometimes managing that ahead of time just helps the family so they don't have to worry about it. And like you said, it is a lot of money that's going down in the ground, but it's really not for that person. It's kind of for everyone else to be able to grieve and celebrate their life. What are you going to say, Linton?
I think it's been pretty much already said. Just my personal experience when my grandmother passed, she had made sure the money was put aside so she could get buried, and she had actually put it in my names and anytime there's funerals or family problems or issues, it can take long to get things done, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. So if you prepare ahead of time and have everything set, then you don't have to worry. You don't have to stress the family out about where the money's gonna come from, where you're gonna get buried, and so forth. So it's been already said. I think if you prepare ahead of time for your funeral expenses, it will save a lot of problems in the end, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So preparation is key. Preparation is key. So as we end, because it is, before we end, let's read this. Dr. C. Ray, you said, if you're really interested in the cheapest thing to do, if you can't do anything else, you could donate your body to research or a medical institution. Lots of people don't like that idea, but it's an option. Just have a memorial and the institution will bury you. That's actually very helpful because I've gone through many of anatomy classes where people have donated their body, and it's allowed us to be able to, learn, look at the different muscles, to learn and be a better doctor because we're able to see it in person. So yes, that is actually a really good idea too. A good option is to donate your body to science. I thank everybody for their advice. What are any takeaways that you've gotten from this lesson? Anything that you're going to take back to you or even consider? You may not even have an answer for it right now, but what are some things that you're going to take away from this lesson? Anything in particular? I would say one thing for me, Karen says she's going to update her will. I think too, I need to update my will. And just to update my will, and then maybe consider that whole pre-planning my funeral. We'll see how that goes. But what other lessons that you've learned, or anything that you're going to take away from this lesson today? Phaedra, anything?
That is actually something I need to think about and start working on, because I mean, seriously, we don't know when our life will be taken. So these are action items.
So true. Yeah. And Robbie says he's going to be updating his will too. You're right. These are action items. And I think also that I like the one other thing that people brought out is that wealth is a gift from God. I think that's what Charmaine said. And it's our responsibility to ask God where he wants our wealth to be and where he wants our money to be. And so I think definitely that's something I will take away from it. So, alrighty. As we end, we're going to open up for prayer requests here. So does anybody have any prayer requests that they would like to share?